Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We've got another video by Palantir's Alex Karp. These are two videos in 1 week of him doing a public interview. First was the CNBC interview that he gave at the Reagan Defense Forum, and now is his 6 minutes of actually talking at the Reagan National Defense Forum. So we're going to react to this. This was done just a couple of days ago. He participated in this event last year. He always talks about peace and technology at the intersection of actually being able to maintain peace and how you can be technologically innovative, and America's at the forefront of that. So a lot of different ideas discussed. Let's get into it, react to it, and see what he had to say. This comes after an interview where he said his TAM is north of $900 billion. So let's see the thoughts and ideas he expressed in this interview.
For February 24th, I think the narrative among our adversaries, and certainly even among some of our allies, and when I've talked to them, a lot of our business outside of America, was something like, well, you in America, you love liberty, you produce great films, but in fact the adversaries are as good as you are on military, and they're willing to do things you're not. And I think the February 24th and what's happening in Ukraine, involving technology in ways some can't really talk about always in public, has changed the narrative around war and America to it's the liberty-loving, tech-building people of the West, especially of America, who produce products that are so superior that the non-freedom-loving people need to shiver a little more than they have in the past. And this is crucial for the West and all of our allies who primarily love the freedoms and liberties we have, to show our adversaries that, in fact, we are superior at modern warfare, which I would define as tech-enhanced kinetic attack weapons. So software-enhanced. The fact that software is eating the world is horrifically important for businesses. Most of our businesses in the private sector, but it's particularly advantageous for America because America is the best at building software. And
so a couple of things here that I want to discuss before we go further. This is sort of a new idea that Karp has been putting out. Well, it's not a new idea, but it's something that he's been vocalizing a little bit more. And again, this is why I'm a fan of Karp. This is why my money is with this guy. I think he can take us to the promised land, is because he's speaking very philosophically on this idea. And the core premise of the idea is that apparently, and I didn't know this, right? So I'm kind of taking Karp's word here. America was seen in regards to a military perspective as a country that is able to produce a lot of culture, a lot of movies, a lot of shows, a lot of stuff in Hollywood, but it was not technologically advanced from a military perspective, even though we know, like from a software perspective, the United States has created some of the biggest companies in the world. But a lot of those companies have been Google, Facebook, right? Like social media stuff, which is all great. But from a technological perspective, apparently, Karp is saying other countries and adversaries were able to be more advanced on the technology when it came to defending their own sovereignty. And the problem is their sovereignty is not a democracy. So when they defend themselves, it comes in the context of imposing themselves, potentially even invading, which is what happened in Ukraine. So what Karp is saying about February 24th and the invasion of Ukraine is that it made America realize that these people that said everything's okay, everything's not okay. And they were never going to just sit idly by and not impose their dictatorial authoritarian ideals upon the world, which is what Russia did with Ukraine, which is what China could potentially do to Taiwan. So what Karp is, the argument he is making here, and I think this philosophy that is going to spearhead Palantir into getting a lot more deals at the end of the day, is that America needs to be safe. America needs to be protected. And in order for America to be safe and protected, it has to have the best technology at the forefront of defending itself, because we've seen that the world is a scary place and that people are not bad actors. And so it's a new idea that Karp has kind of been propagandizing a little bit, and it makes a lot of sense to me. The question just becomes, does it translate into actually getting more deals? They got $800 million of governmental deals in September. Let's see if they can get more.
The fact that we can build weapons, software-enhanced weapons, that really make our adversaries... America is the best at building software. And the fact that we can build weapons, software-enhanced weapons, that really make our adversaries quiver, as Senator Graham said in a more articulate way than I could, that prevents war. And now, what does that mean for the tech sector? You're seeing a lot of tech companies who once thought the way to support the U.S. military was to first hand technology to our adversaries, and this has shifted. There's more of a unity of we are going to support the U.S. government, not just crazy Palantir and their crazy, batshit crazy CEO. It's like we are going to support the U.S. government, and this is crucial. It's like we have the resources in this country. We often have not used them to support our warfighters, and that's changed. And in great part because our adversaries are clearly just worthy of getting kicked in the fanny.
A technical term.
Yeah. the thing is that there's in philosophy of sometimes you have dynamics that are kind of autopoietic, meaning they self-actualize. A lot of your questions are what should we ought to do, but in reality, American business has decoupled from China, and I would say the dynamic in this country is very much one of skepticism, and that is going to affect our policies. And I believe, you can argue about what should happen, but what will happen is a decoupling. Now, again, I'm not saying that's what one should want, but if you look at the pressures on business, the pressures on military, the pressures on polity, Americans, by and large, support this. And then, again, in American business currently, 5-6 years ago, there were a lot of industries that thought they were going to export to China and America. There still are some, very few. And so that's just going to have a very different dynamic on the future. And again, I would disambiguate is and ought. I think that is what's going to happen.
Now, a couple of things here. When he says disambiguating is and ought is a moral term, right? Like what you ought to do versus what is going to happen. And so Karp is saying, I think companies ought not work in China, right? They have a moral obligation to not work in China. But the question is, what is going to happen? What is not going to happen at the end of the day? This is really good for Palantir if companies stop working in China. The reason for this is because Palantir doesn't work in China or Russia. So the more companies that stop outsourcing their labor and their technology to these dictatorial regimes in order to just decrease their costs means the more business comes to America. The more business that comes to America, the more opportunities Palantir has to take some of that business from a software perspective or to enhance that business. So for example, let's say you're a company that makes, for lack of a better example, AirPods, right? And so let's say you're Apple and you need to optimize your supply chains. You could go to China and try to optimize your supply chains in China, but the problem is Palantir won't work with you because they're not meant to work in China. They're not meant to optimize things in China, right? They don't want that business for a lot of philosophical and moral reasons. If you're Apple and you bring all your AirPods to America, now production to America or India, I don't think Apple would ever work with Palantir, by the way, but like, let's say they did. Now Palantir has the chance to win that business, to sell that software to Apple, to make sure the supply chain of their logistics around AirPods productions is more enhanced. It has data-driven decision-making. It has an ontology, a single source of truth. You have Apollo that could be the back-end software for certain parts of Apple. I'm making this kind of example up, but the more business that comes to the United States, the more opportunity Palantir has, and the more de-globalized the world becomes. And, one would argue globalization is good, and there's a lot of benefits to it. The problem is the stuff we're seeing is that if China invades Taiwan and American companies have all their manufacturing in China, well, that's not a good thing for American companies, right? That means we're beholden to China. And so as much, benefits globalization has brought, the de-globalization trend, which was Stanley Druckenmiller, one of the first investors of Palantir, said is going to happen over the next 10, 20 years, that may bring new opportunities for American businesses. And one of those, opportunities may go to Palantir.
One of the notable phenomena in the aftermath of Russia's expanded war in Ukraine was the flight of private sector business from Russia. Does that merely reflect the coercive power of sanctions, or is there something else happening here? Are different choices, value choices being made by the private sector?
Well, again, we of course didn't have to flee Russia. We were never there. So, so I think, honestly, good moral choices will lead to good business choices. But I think what really is going to hurt Russia over the long haul is just in my business, you need the best of the best of the best of the best. And they do not want to work in a country that is invading their neighbor and committing atrocities. And it's not, the GDP in Russia is just not one that most international businesses are particularly focused on. That's different than China, obviously, although I'd say that's more European businesses. What will really mess up your ability to build complicated technical systems is an inability to explain to people what is good about my country. And again, it doesn't have to, and I think that's why people fled, and I don't think they're going to go back very quickly. And it's not actually about the capital market; it's about the moral market.
Is it especially incumbent on America's high-tech partners to make a choice about where they're doing business?
I think it is an indisputable fact that there are certain things, software platforms, that are disruptive, and America is the focal point of building. And there are other countries. Israel is quite strong. There's some strong companies in France. It is absolutely essential that we make decisions that are long-term in unison with the countries that allowed us to grow. In this case, for most of us, the United States of America. And I don't think we should be allowed to just say, oh, we got rich here. We are the wealthiest, most powerful people in industry in the world, but we don't support the United States of America. And why? Because you see in the Ukraine, and you will see in other places, that the products we build actually sway the world to our direction. Not as a matter of theory, not as a matter of rhetoric, but a matter of fact. And that's why I think we have a higher level of responsibility.
If you're an investor in Palantir, you've got to believe in this overall thesis that Karp is talking about. The government business and the commercial business are never going to be separated. They're going to be together underneath one company. And Palantir CEO Alex Karp can do an interview with Hertz CEO and explain how they're using data-driven decision-making to make their supply chains and their cars more effective, and to figure out, like, when customers should get the car, when they should not get the car. They can work with the Cleveland Clinic and partner to be able to make patient outflows more efficient. And then they can work with the United States federal government to literally make sure that no one ever attacks us, and that if there is some geopolitical uncertainty in the world, that Palantir can be the first involved in helping countries that are harmed. I mean, this is the multifaceted approach to investing in Palantir, and we will look back on this video in 10 years from now and see if I was right, if that multifaceted approach actually led to shareholder value. I think it will. And I think it will, because I think when you've got a company that is uniquely doing these three things, Snowflake is not doing these things, Datadog is not doing these things. They're doing other different things, but they're not doing these types of things, nor do I think their version of what Foundry can become is as powerful as Foundry or Apollo or Gotham. I mean, like, and not to mention all the new products that are coming out. I think this is an asymmetrical bet, and if I'm going to hold something for 10 years, I'm going to believe in this philosophy and I'm going to write it out. That doesn't mean I'm going to be ignorant to the numbers. That doesn't mean I'm going to, be unemotional or overly emotional when I see the numbers. But that does mean that I'm going to give them some grace, give them some time, let them execute their vision. And we'll see in a couple years how things have turned out, and then decide if we want to even hold longer. But this is the overall thoughts. This is the philosophy I agree with, and this is a argument I want to get behind. The macro is not pretty right now. Macro is not going to help the stock. It doesn't even. I don't even think it's worth looking at the stock given the macro. Once the macro gets better, once Wall Street starts factoring into these deals, then let's see what happens. But overall, if you believe in Palantir, you believe in this idea of protecting the West, and you also believe in this idea to not work with Russia. You didn't have to leave Russia because you never worked with them, and as a result of that, that good moral choice leads to good business. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think about Palantir CEO Alex Karp at the Reagan National Defense Forum 2022. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I will see you in the next one.